I am Liz Pierre, Chair of the UL System Board of Supervisors. Before we begin today, let me remind you that anyone who wishes to make a public comment about an agenda item must complete a testimony/information card and hand it to a UL System staff member seated in the front. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. As a courtesy to everyone, I ask that you turn off your cell phones. Thank you. At this time, I would like Dr. Calais to please call the roll.
Dr. Jim Henderson.
Here.
Miss Elizabeth Pierre.
Here.
Dr. Chris Balders.
Here.
Mr. Ricky Burke.
Here.
Mr. Bill Chauvin. Dr. Jimmy Clark.
Here.
Dr. Tammy Griffin Major.
Here.
Miss Susan Hess.
Here.
Mr. Sonny Lee.
Here.
Miss Joe Leatherman.
Present.
Miss Becky Mackey.
Here.
Dr. Judy Morse. Here. Dr. Brandon Mott. I'm sorry, Mr. Brandon Mott.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Al Perkins. Mr. Dana Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Virgil Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Mark Romero.
Here.
Mr. Bobby Savoy.
Here.
Mr. Gary Solomon.
Here.
Mr. Brad Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Julie Stokes.
Here.
Ms. Bailey Willis.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Calais. At this point, I will turn our meeting over to our committee chair, Dr. Jim Henderson.
Thank you, Ms. Pierre. So earlier today, we began the process of conducting public interviews with our 5 semifinalists for the position of president of the University of New Orleans. We're pleased that each has accepted our invitation to visit University of New Orleans and to meet not only with the search committee, but also with faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members who together make University of New Orleans the great university that it is. Not only are we afforded the opportunity to interact with all the candidates to discern their ability to lead this institution, but also the visits allow the candidates to determine whether this is the best choice for them. We have just interviewed Dr. Kathy Johnson, and the search committee will now interview Dr. Kimbrough. The remaining 2 semifinalists will be, 2 will be interviewed tomorrow and 1 more this afternoon. Does any member of the committee have a question at this time? Do you have any public comments at this time?
No, sir.
Now, before we begin our interview with semifinalist Dr. Walter Kimbrough, I'd like to share with you the framework for this interview. Dr. Kimbrough will provide an opening statement, and then the search committee will ask questions. After the search committee has exhausted its questions, Dr. Erica Calais may address questions to the candidate that have been submitted by the audience. Again, if anyone would like to submit a question to be considered, please do so by completing a comment card and turning it in to a UL System staff member. We will entertain as many public questions as time allows. Following the interview, the committee will enter into executive session to further dialogue with the candidate. Once Dr. Kimbrough has been interviewed and his executive session is concluded, the search committee will return to open session and recess until 4 p.m. today, at which time we will interview Dr. Larissa Stab. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Kimbrough to the table. That's quick, Doc. That's amazing. A native of Atlanta, Dr. Walter Kimbrough was his high school salutatorian and student body president in 1985, and went on to earn degrees from the University of Georgia, Miami University in Ohio, and a doctorate in higher education from Georgia State University. He has enjoyed a fulfilling career in student affairs, serving at Emory University, Georgia State University, Old Dominion University, and Albany State University. In October of 2004, at the age of 37, he was named the 12th president of Philander Smith College. In 2012, he became the 7th president of Dillard University in New Orleans and served for 10 years. Dr. Kimbrough served as the interim executive director of the Black Men's Research Institute at Morehouse College during the 2022-23 academic year. He was also named executive in residence for the University of Southern California Race and Equity Center. In early 2022, he was appointed by President Joe Biden to the President's Board of Advisors on historically black colleges and universities. Dr. Kimbrough has been recognized for his research and writings on HBCUs and African American men in college. Recently, he has emerged as one of the leaders discussing free speech on college campuses. Dr. Kimbrough has been noted for his active use of social media. He was cited by Education Dive as one of 10 college presidents on Twitter who are doing it right. And his handle is @HipHopPrez. So, if you didn't know that. Some people think that's me, but that's Walt. In 2015, he was named the bestschools.org as one of the 20 most interesting college presidents. In 2023, College Cliffs named him as one of the 55 top U.S. college and university presidents. And in 2021, he was named the Georgia State University Alumni of the Year award winner. Thank you, Dr. Kimbrough, for joining us today. Would you please take a few moments to introduce yourself and provide the committee with an opening statement?
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Talking about quick to get to the table is quick when you think that it took me about 7 minutes to drive here from where I live since I live in Gentilly. This has been an interesting period of time for me because I never would imagine I would have had an opportunity like this to be here with you today. I spent 10 years at Dillard University, so I'm very familiar with the city and with this institution. And after that period of time, if you paid attention nationally, the average tenure of a college president now is less than 6 years. When I became a president 18 years ago, it was about 9 years. So there's been a lot of turnover. And I just felt after a period of time, it's time to do something different. I had no idea what I would be doing. I'm a United Methodist preacher's kids. That's one of those things you just sort of step out on faith and say, I'm just going to try and see what happens. Immediately, I had a chance to go work at Morehouse. I'm a native of Atlanta, so I was a chance to be at home for a year, back and forth, and that was great. But just waiting to see what kind of opportunities would happen. I had no idea that John would leave and go to Florida. And when it opened up, it was just interesting. And my wife was like, what about the University of New Orleans? Yeah, maybe, because as you heard in the background, I've worked at two institutions that are very similar, Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and Georgia State University. So this is a familiar environment for me. And so I thought it would be an opportunity to look and see, as Dr. Henderson said in the introduction, if this would be a good fit. Yeah, I come as an experienced president, and the average age of college presidents is about 60. I'm 56, but I have 17 years of experience, so it makes me somewhat of a unicorn to have that much experience as a president. But I think there are opportunities here, and as someone who has seen this higher ed environment, I think I could capitalize on that and help move the institution forward. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and the questions that you might have today.
Thank you, Dr. Kimbrough. We're going to entertain questions from the committee, from the search committee, and we'll start with a question from your far right, Tammy Griffin Major.
Good afternoon.
What is it about the University of New Orleans that convinced you to apply for this job?
So part of it was when I was telling people earlier, when I looked at the initial meeting that you had to get some feedback from the broader community, and the first person you talked to was a student who was here from California. He indicated that in this environment, this was an institution he never heard much about. People would come and say Tulane, Loyola, Dillard, Xavier, Delgado, and not the University of New Orleans. And so I think that based on my experience here and experience at campuses that are very diverse, helping this institution to say, how do we develop a unique identity and brand, as well as address some of the issues, because I'm really into issues of persistence and graduation. How do we move those graduation rates? I think that's very important too. So I feel like based on the experiences that I have, that this would be a good opportunity. For me, it's an opportunity of growth as well. It's a larger institution to have a chance to lead that as well. So those are some of the things that I would bring to the table. But I think it's intriguing because I think there's a lot of opportunity here. As most people would say, it's not like there's a bad reputation, but it's still very much, for many people, unknown, and not a lot of engagement with the broader community. So how then do we bridge that gap between the broader community and this institution? I think it's just a great opportunity to do something, I think, creative here. So for me, that is attractive.
Very good. Staying at that end of the table, we'll have a question from Brendan Mott. Brendan?
So how would you make yourself accessible to and engage with students, faculty, staff members, et cetera?
So there are several things, and Brendan had a chance to sit in with the students earlier today. I think part of my background, I consider myself to be a student affairs professional consistently. And so I'm looking for ways to meaningfully have those conversations with people on campus. I told the faculty and staff group earlier, one of the things I've done for both of my presidencies coming in is to send out a notice on day number one that anybody on campus who wants to have a meeting with me, they get 30 minutes. At Dillard, I did 200 meetings like that, so it'll be more of those here. But to me, that's a very good use of time, and as I tell people, I know how to be a president, and I think I know a little bit about this institution, but I don't know the people and some of the things that you can learn. I think that's a valuable process because a lot of people come in and they think they know and they have some grandiose vision. I'm coming in as a president, they don't have a clue. And so I've been president long enough to know you don't have a clue, even though you think you might have an idea. So that's a good way to start. And then you're out and you're engaged. You're going to the student meetings and those kinds of things. At a smaller institution, I could do small lunch groups with 3 or 4 students. Here, I could still do them on campus, but maybe 10 or 12 students, just to get an idea. Who are the people who come to school here? What's important to them? I would go out and meet with community people. One of the things I like to do is have focus groups with community leaders, and one of the questions I always ask is, if you could write a letter of recommendation for the University of New Orleans, what would you say? That gives you an idea of what they think about the institution as well. So it's a lot of data gathering, but it's just being a part of the community, coming to events, participating with the athletic events. I think all of those things are very important. So you have to really, this has to be something that you live the life as a president. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week type job, but you make yourself available. And I think that's something that can be done. Even at a larger institution, I tell people, my father's a retired United Methodist minister. He served 2 churches in Atlanta that had over 7,500 members. And so I grew up watching somebody be engaged with a broad constituency like this. So even the size of the institution is not daunting to me, because I live with a man who would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go pray with someone before they had surgery and was out late at night doing X, Y, and Z. So I understand that life, and it's something that I'm passionate about doing. So those are the kinds of practices that I would employ. And I think particularly being at a small liberal arts HBCU, I definitely have a keen understanding of how important that is in terms of building community. And I think that is one of the great opportunities here. How do we build community?
Very good. On the other end of the table, we'll hear a question from the Faculty Senate President, Dr. Chris Broadhurst.
Dr. Kimbrough, shared governance is a common phrase in higher education with multiple applications. We also know that administrators sometimes have very different interpretations of what shared governance actually is. What is your perspective on shared governance, and what approach would you use to promote shared governance at the University of New Orleans?
Yeah, thank you. So a part of this process, and I tell people, sometimes people dismiss processes like this because this is a great example of shared governance, where you've had open sessions for the different constituencies starting at the beginning of the process to get feedback, for all of the candidates to be able to come in and have conversation to submit their feedback. That's a part of it. For a president on a day-to-day basis is working with all the different constituencies to gather that information. I think that's a part of it. So it's a lot of transparent sharing of information and collecting a lot of feedback. But I always tell people too, there is shared governance, but there isn't shared accountability. So when something bad happens, they're not saying, I'm coming to fire the faculty senate president. They're coming for the president. And so that's part of it. So you have to tell people that we collect a lot of information, but ultimately that person who serves as president, he or she has to make some of those decisions. But how are you engaged with people on a day-to-day basis, sharing information, exchanging ideas, I think is a part of the process. And to really listen, and sometimes you might just say, I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but the consensus is to do this, and you try to do some of those things as well, and be willing to say, if we have to take a loss, I'm going to take the loss because I want to really be in community with everyone. So that's the way I look at it. I mean, reading some of the history here, I think when Peter became the president and there was some cuts that were made for programs, there was a faculty committee that did a lot of that work to share it. That's, I think, a good example of a shared governance process as well. So those are some thoughts I would have on that. Yeah.
Back to your right, from Student Representative Bailey Willis.
There are already, collaboration with community colleges and other four-year universities is essential given today's limited financial resources. Describe your experience in developing beneficial relationships with community colleges and other four-year institutions, particularly related to expanded access to students and facilitating transfers.
Okay. Well, it's interesting being a part of the higher education community in this city that the presidents, we would normally communicate pretty regularly, particularly when there's bad weather, because you're trying to figure out who's going to be the first to let their students and faculty go home, because then you get the pressure. So it's like, if you're going to do this, let me know first, so I don't have my students saying, well, look, UNO just let everybody go. So we had a lot of conversations, and particularly during COVID, we did a lot of that as well, having regular meetings. So I think one of the great things about this higher ed community is that there has been a tradition of presidents working together. And so we're able to, for example, the private institutions in here in this city have an articulation agreement where a student at Dillard could take classes at Tulane and Xavier and those kinds of things. So we had that kind of relationship. I think we try to work, if there are opportunities for students to attend graduate school. So for Dillard, it was interesting. I was here during a break in the student union in this building downstairs, and one of the students who was at Dillard when I was there is now a graduate student here in mechanical engineering. So he walks up, so we're having this conversation. So I think that's a part of what we do. So I think that this environment, particularly in this city and in this region, is ripe for those kinds of collaborations, and I think the presidents here have done a really good job. So to me, that's been one of the benefits of being here, is that we really have had that, kind of camaraderie, if you will. There's some newer folks that have come in the last couple of years, but so I don't know what that dynamic is today, but Mike Fitz at Tulane is still there. He would remember what we've done, those kinds of things. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that we've taken advantage of, and we definitely have done that as part of my time as president of Dillard.
Very good. On the far left, a question from Gary Solomon.
There are already some exciting partnerships and innovative programs started in connection with UNO and the industries around us. These could be used to meet industry needs, expand enrollment, and maybe even increase private revenue. Can you talk to us some about your experience with outside partnerships?
So some of the work that we did particularly was through GNO Inc. And one of the things that happened several times that when the region was trying to recruit industry to come to the greater New Orleans region, there would be opportunities, and I had an opportunity a couple of times to actually do presentations to say, here are the assets that a Dillard University would bring in terms of a workforce, particularly companies that want to diversify. So they definitely wanted the historically black colleges and universities in the area to present as a part of that. So there was really good coordination, I think, from the GNO Inc. level. All of the, the presidents have a chance to sit on that board. So you're in the meetings with industry and business leaders to have those conversations, and also the city has a business council, so I was able to go to those meetings as well to be engaged in that. But there were opportunities that I would have to be able to help pitch the area for companies that are coming in. And I know the University of New Orleans was a part of those processes as well. So I've just had direct experience being a part of that process, working through our regional chamber and other business entities.
Very good. Back to the right, a question from Ricky Burke. Ricky?
Yes, I'm sure you've already heard a lot about the budget challenges across the board in higher education. It'll be crucial for the next president to have a deep knowledge and ability to manage the budgets and to prioritize expenses, and also to find new revenue from other sources. Please talk about your experience in this area.
Well, anyone who has served as a president of a historically black institution has dealt with under-resourced institutions that serve under-resourced people. So I have 17 and a half years of not having everything I've needed to get things done. Being private institutions, we really had to focus on how do we generate external revenue. One of the things that I really wanted to do was improve alumni giving, because that becomes a base for unrestricted funds to do several things. But it also then sent a message when I met with national foundations, because foundations still ask, what is your alumni giving rate, with the philosophy being, if the people closest to you won't give, why should we give? So for me to leverage those relationships that I have with national foundations to be able to do that, and I would argue that for many public institutions, and particularly in this state, there needs to be more of a private institution mindset, because the percentage of the budget that comes from the state has continuously decreased. When I started graduate school at Miami University of Ohio, in our higher ed program, the idea was, all the literature says, a public institution would get about 75% of their funds from the state. It's nowhere near that. So many public institutions pretty much are operating like private institutions. So you have to invest more in your alumni giving and foundation and corporate support. There was a period of time when in Congress they were pulling back on earmarks, but some of those have increased again. So how do you go back and reach and get some of those earmarks are part of that as well. but it's working through the system to make sure that we are all effectively lobbying for additional funding in higher education, which becomes a broader national challenge because, as we know, the public perception of higher education continues to decline. And so it's hard when higher ed says, come and we need additional money, and people say, well, it already costs too much money. So once again, how then do we prove the value that we provide for our communities? And for a public research institution, how are we making the lives of New Orleanians better every day? We need to be able to show that so people have a greater appreciation for the work and are willing to support increased investment in higher education in this state. So there are a number of things I think that have to be done, but working with limited resources is something that I've had to do all too much, so I understand that. But I think there are some opportunities. I think just the mindset has to change somewhat, that you think a little bit more like a private institution where you're responsible for generating the funds that you need.
Very good. Staying in that general direction, a question from Sonny Lee.
Hey, I'm good. Thank you.
What are your thoughts about how to balance the priorities of academics and athletics at the university?
I think that for me, I always look at retention and graduation rates first, because I think that's very important. Here within this system, this institution still has the lowest graduation rate. And then when you start disaggregating data like I do, black student graduation rate here is really, really low. So we've got to deal with those kinds of things. But I think part of that is, how are we creating community on campus so that people feel like they're a part of the institution? And that's a role that athletics can play. When I worked at Old Dominion, and this institution reminds me of Old Dominion so much, even the colors are the same colors. I was director of student activities. We would have students drive to campus, eat lunch in their car, go to class, and then go home. So they weren't engaged at all. Of your beds on campus, about half of them are outsourced to Xavier, some for SUNO students. So you're housing less than 10% of your student body. The national average is 18%. When you're able to house more of your students on campus to help build community, that's important. And then when they're housed on campus, what do? That's when athletics comes in, and it plays a critical role on those campuses to help build spirit. We saw that at Dillard. We could have a volleyball game with 1,000 people, and people are just like, we have 1,200 students. So how do you get people to get excited about that? Because just like the University of New Orleans, we didn't have football, so how do we build in those other things? So that helps create a sense of pride. And I'm very competitive, so if I became the president here and joined this athletic conference, I would be the biggest trash talker in the conference. That's a given already, because people that hate to see me coming. So I'm really a big sports fan. I think that's important as well. But it's about the broader. How does this help us build community? And then that community sense of community drives graduation rates. And so that's the way I look at it. So I think they're linked together. And I think they're both important, but I got to start and say, what other things do we need to do to address these graduation rates? And that definitely is part of it. But we've got to build a sense of community, so it's not a place where people are in and out. You're going to have some that you meet, that is a part of their need, that I'm working full time and I have a more utilitarian approach for the institution, and I think that's okay too. But you still have a significant number of students who are 24 years of age and under, and are more traditional age students. And so how do you get them engaged? I think is very important. So athletics is part of that. And for the broader community is one of the things I heard is the first meeting that you had. People in the community were saying, we support the athletics. So that becomes another opportunity for people to have an experience with the university that I think is important.
Very good. Question number 8 will come from Bobby Savoy. Bobby.
Dr. Kimbrough, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You talked about this a bit, but as you know, that a growing and critical part of the job of a campus president would be to connect the community and legislators and businesses and others in order to win support for UNO. My question is, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I would, like I said, I would continue to do things that I have done during that decade as president of Dillard. I would go to everything that was possible to go to be engaged. And so it's not just those formal things. If the Urban League had something and Judy asked me to come to that, I participated in their events. It didn't matter who it was. I've been to Son of a Saint events. I don't have to be on the program, but sometimes you're just there and then somebody shouts you out as the president of the institution. I don't have to say anything, but then you're on people's minds because you just show up and you go to the different things and you're engaged with the broader community. And I think that's very important. I think John was doing some of those things, so you definitely would continue that. Like I said, the advantage I would have is that I already know a lot of the key players, so it's just like me, I'm putting on a different uniform now. I was trying to think of the right analogy, and it's probably, I'm a baseball fan, I'm a Yankees fan, we're not doing well right now, but David Cone was pitching for the New York Mets, and he pitched for the Mets, and then he pitched for the Yankees. He was an all-star with both, but he won 4 World Series with the Yankees. So it would be sort of like that. You're in the same city, you're wearing a different jersey, and so that would be the opportunity, the way I would look at it.
Very good. Back to your far left, we have a question from Susan Hess.
Yes, please describe the president's role in fundraising. We need it. What experience will you bring to the University of New Orleans that will enable you to enhance this important function?
So I think there are several ways that you look at it. I would first come in and evaluate the fundraising operation, because fundraising is a sophisticated operation. It's not just, you know, sometimes I hear people saying they're going out begging. That's not really what you do. You really use a lot of data and you follow up. The president has to be out there and be the face and the voice of the institution. You work with your advancement staff to say what kinds of opportunities are we using? Are we using new fundraising methods? So for example, people started doing Giving Tuesdays. We did our first Giving Tuesday at Dillard and just on a whim and raised like $60,000, and we didn't do anything. We were just like, man, maybe we should start leaning into this. My last year at Dillard, we raised $1.3 million on Giving Tuesday, which is a lot for a little bitty school. But there is a way to do it. There's a science to do those kinds of things. So it's working with your advancement team. It's, like I said, building your alumni giving rate. I think that's very important. And so advancement is, part of that too is being, I think, the chief fundraiser and advancement officer is telling the stories of people so people get excited and they want to give to the institution. They want to be a part of it. And so I think you leverage everything that's available. Social media, which is free. How do you consistently tell stories about the institution that gets people to be excited so they want to participate? Those are the kinds of things. So I would just look at the fundamentals. You know, how are we tracking our annual gifts? Who are our major donors? Are we following up? You go through all those things. What are our relationships with certain foundations? When we had conversations with them, working through the legislature and those kinds of things. So all of those things are part of that fundraising operation. But to me, it's a sophisticated and well thought out operation, not something that's done haphazardly. So I would definitely look to see what kind of operation do we have in place. How do you strengthen that so you take advantage of it?
Very good. The final question from the committee is going to come from Joe Leatherman. Joe?
Okay, I have a two-part question. So with your experience, you know that the pressure, scrutiny, and obligations associated with the university president are ever present and the work hours are very long. Can you talk a little bit about how you deal with that pressure? Do you feel that you are ready and capable to handle the demands that would be placed on you and your family? And to follow up with that, how do you unwind and what are your hobbies?
Okay, very good. And I think that's a great question because I know lots of people who want to be presidents but don't want to do president. And those are two different things, because you're right. It's living in a fishbowl. Or a colleague who was a president at a place and he only lasted 3 years, he said I was living in a shark tank. So he had a lot of challenges as a part of that. But you know, once again, I became a president when I was 37. So most of my professional career has been as a college president. My wife has worked on a campus before. She was our pre-law advisor at Dillard when she first got here and she was working for a firm. Then she was pre-law advisor. Now she works for NAACP Legal Defense Fund. My kids have only known me as a college president. They were born, both of them. My daughter's a senior at Franklin. My son is a freshman at Newman. So everybody understands how it works, and even though they're getting older now, so when they were younger, I used to just drag them around everything on campus, and now everybody has their own agenda. So it's sort of like, even though my son got excited about this because he's like, they have Division I basketball here, so he really got excited. So if you don't know anything, he's pulling that I get this job. So I'm going to put that in for Benjamin because he's really excited about this, because then that means he gets to stay in New Orleans. So he's really excited. But people have to think about it, because I think people don't really understand what this means. And so I do. For me, I try to spend some time every day working out. I have my elliptical with television, so if I can just get home, afternoon and work out a little bit, because I'm going to be up late going through, research and all the nerdy stuff I like to do, because I like to be very prepared. So I spend a lot of time studying and understand what's going on. So if I get at least my hour in and I can watch, mindless television, reality TV shows, I'm good. That usually works for me. That keeps me grounded. So those are the kinds of things that I do. And then for my son's AAU team, I'm actually the team photographer. So I was traveling around taking the pictures. The parents look for me I think I'm getting pretty good too. So maybe that could be a second career at some point. But I look for those kinds of things. But I think that's a fantastic, people have to really think about what it means. And that's why you're seeing the tenure of presidents drop, because people have no idea what they're getting into.
I think Admiral McCraven called it the most difficult job in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Calais, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, sir. We have two questions. The first question is from Dr. Nick Mueller. He's a member of the community and former faculty member here at UNO. What can you tell us to convince us of your success in building bridges to the New Orleans community and to improve UNO's record in serving the needs of working adults in greater New Orleans with credit programs?
Well, just in terms of, building credibility and alliances with people in the community, as I said, you have to be out and be engaged. And I think that's very important, because people want to support the institutions. Like I said, one of the things I'd have to do is meet with different people and ask them, what is your impression of this institution? Because I did the same thing with Dillard. I want to know, what did people think about the institution? I need to know where we are. And then you build from there. But it's doing the little things, showing up, being present at places that you're expected and unexpected. And then you're able to open up opportunities, because people will say, okay, you're serious about this. I want to partner with you to do X, Y, and Z. I think that that's very important to do. But it's a lot of the time on task is being present and being engaged, and living here 11 years. People want people who love the city and they're engaged with the community, and not viewed as somebody that's just here to try to build a resume or do whatever. So like I said, my family is invested here, and I already have some of those relationships, but now it's, trying to position it for a new entity. And so to leverage those relationships that exist and to create new relationships, I think is very important to do.
Yeah.
I think it was a follow-up part of that about adult students, did you say, Eric?
Yes, sir. Yes. Serving the needs of working adults in greater New Orleans with credit programs.
Yeah, and there are different ways to do that. This institution has had a history of being able to provide for adult and working students. And so you have and it's a significant number, so I think that's a part of how do you frame an identity for this institution with these very diverse constituencies. And I think that's a part of it too. So we've got to do the research to figure out how do we do that, particularly in an era now where everybody is going after working adults, particularly through online programs. And a lot of people feel like that's a silver bullet for everybody. And I say it's not necessarily. If you have a place like Southern New Hampshire, which spends a quarter of their budget on marketing alone, you'll never spend a quarter of your budget on marketing. You can't afford to do that. So it's hard to be able to do that like that, but there are ways that you can serve those populations and figure out, are there ways to do that? You can do some online for people here, because the brand of the institution would mean more than a Southern New Hampshire. And so you might not be able to get people from all across the country, but could you get more people in the state to do classes online because they value the name of the institution? Absolutely. So those would be the kinds of things I would think about doing.
Thank you. The second question is from Mr. Kevin Conrad, a UNO alumnus. In Louisiana, college athletics drive student applications. What is your specific plan to increase funding of athletics and make those programs relevant again?
Yeah, so I mean, you just went through the process where you looked at football, and two of the institutions that I mentioned that I work with that are very similar, Old Dominion and Georgia State, did add football, but it was not successful in terms of that referendum for students. And there were students who said, you know, I came here because it did not have football. So are there ways that you can build out strong athletic programs without football? Absolutely. There are places that do that. And you lean more into your basketball and volleyball, and you got baseball and those kinds of things. There are opportunities to do it. You've got to have people who are willing to give for that too. And I think sometimes, I mean, Louisiana is a big football state, but when you really start looking particularly Division I at the bottom line, very few programs in the nation actually make money off of football. Everybody loves it, but it's heavily subsidized. So even the ones that might come ahead in the black, they're discounting how much that there's institutional support and student fee support. You can look at the database that Syracuse, the Knight Foundation has, and you can go through, and I've looked at that a number of times. Just so many programs lose money, and so that becomes a challenge. So I think you have to say, how do we build a robust culture around the sports that we do have? Because I think that's important. Like I said, I'm a big sports fan, but I've watched institutions too try to jump into something that they weren't prepared and end up messing up everything too. So you have to be careful to say, well, we should just add X, Y, and Z, and you add these things and people say, yes, we want them, and then they don't support them with their finances, and then you have a big problem on your hands. So I think it's important, but you have to be very careful in terms of how you go about with athletics.
Thank you. There are no more questions, Dr. Henderson.
Thank you, Dr. Calais. At this time, I would ask that the committee meet in executive session pursuant to revised statute 42, section 17, to discuss the personnel matters in association with this presidential search. While in executive session, the committee may meet with its staff, legal counsel, or other persons it deems necessary. No motions nor other action may be taken while in executive session. May I have a motion and a second to go into executive session?
So moved. Second.